service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
In today's top stories, over 10,468 Palestinian civilians, mainly children, have been slaughtered by the Israeli military occupation in its ongoing genocidal campaign. The Palestine Red Crescent Society has warned that fuel reserves at Al-Quds hospital in Gaza City will run out as the Zionist entity has been barring the entry of fuel into Gaza. And Ukraine's ambitions of joining the European Union received an important boost on Wednesday when the bloc's executive body said detailed negotiations should begin next year. Hello and welcome to Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Samani. The intense bombardment of the Gaza Strip by the Zionist occupation forces, one of the world's most densely populated areas, has caused the deaths of 10,468 Palestinians, including 4,237 children, since the war started on October 7th. The Ministry of Health in Gaza said the number of people wounded has increased to 25,965. Said Bouazi has more details.
On October 9th, the Zionist occupation authorities announced a total blockade of the already besieged enclave, including a ban on water and food. 2 days later, it cut off the power and restricted the entry of aid and fuel. An estimated 1.5 million people have been displaced, their condition ever more precarious because of the lack of essential supplies. Rights groups have warned for years about the deteriorating water situation in the Gaza Strip. In 2021, the Global Institute for Water, Environment and Health and the Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor described Gaza's water as undrinkable, with 90% of its water unfit for consumption. Now, the lack of electricity means that desalination and wastewater treatment plants can't run, further compromising access to safe drinking water. On November 4th, the occupation forces destroyed a water reservoir in northern Gaza, as well as a public water tank that supplied several neighborhoods in the south. Many people are drinking polluted, salty water and queue for hours in the hope of obtaining potable water. The World Health Organization says that between 50 and 100 liters of water per person per day are needed, but it has put the average daily allocation in Gaza at a mere 3 liters for all daily needs, including drinking and hygiene. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, says that 80% of the population in Gaza was already food insecure prior to the start of the attacks on October 7th. Nearly half the population of 2.3 million people relied on food assistance from the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA. Before October 7th, about 500 trucks on average were allowed into Gaza each day. According to the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, since October 21st, at least 451 trucks have entered Gaza, of which 158 carried food, including canned fish, pasta, wheat flour, canned tomato paste, and canned beans. 102 carried health supplies, 44 had water or hygiene products, 32 carried non-food items, and 8 had nutrition supplies. The remaining trucks carried mixed cargo. Fuel supplies are still not allowed to enter Gaza, which is seriously affecting the hospitals still functioning and risking the lives of thousands. The World Food Programme says food stocks in Gaza are running out, with barely 5 days of supplies left. For every person who has received food assistance, at least 6 more are in need.
Still, with the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza following the offensive by the apartheid Israel, the spokesperson of the Palestinian Health Ministry, Ashraf al-Qudra, has said that the Israeli occupation keeps bombing the Gaza Strip relentlessly without sparing the basic daily necessities of the enclave.
لا زال يستمر في مسح الأحياء السكنية.
The Israeli occupation keeps ravaging inhabited neighborhoods and bombing and targeting houses and destroying them with their inhabitants inside, as well as targeting hospitals and service institutions and ambulances, not to mention the basic daily necessities in the Gaza Strip, notably renewable energies, as well as bakeries and the tanks of drinking water.
That was the statement of the spokesperson of the Palestinian Health Ministry, Ashraf al-Qudri. Now, the Palestine Red Crescent Society has warned that fuel reserves at Al-Quds Hospital in Gaza City will run out in 24 hours, as Israel has been barring the entry of fuel into Gaza since October 7th. Asya Bekar has the details.
In a statement, it said that once the fuel runs out, vital equipment at the hospital will shut down, including resuscitation equipment, baby incubators, and intensive care units. It added that the hospital is already suffering from a severe lack of medicines and food and water for its medical staff, patients, and displaced people. The statement noted that over 14,000 displaced Palestinians have been sheltering at the hospital for more than 3 weeks. It said that the Israeli army is still denying the entry of basic materials, including fuel for the hospital and its ambulance services. At least 10,328 Palestinians, including 4,237 children, have been killed in Israeli bombardments in the Gaza Strip, in addition to 25,965 wounded. Let's note that a month after the beginning of the ongoing Zionist war on the defenseless Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip, the International Committee of the Red Cross has called on the parties to the conflict to put an end to the suffering of civilians, particularly children, deploring a moral bankruptcy. It said that massive bombardments are destroying civilian infrastructure throughout Gaza, sowing the seeds of suffering for generations to come. The president of the ICRC said she was particularly shocked by the suffering endured in Gaza. In Gaza, ICRC surgeons are treating very young children whose skin has been charred by extensive burns.
The unconditional support of the United States to Israel's genocide is continuing with its latest move where Republican Rashidat Tlaib, the only Palestinian American in Congress, was censored by the Republican-controlled House of Representatives following a vote late on Tuesday. Congresswoman Rashidat Tlaib teared up as she reiterated her calls for a ceasefire in Gaza during a debate over a resolution to censor her over comments on Israel's bombing of Gaza.
I can't believe I have to say this, but Palestinian people are not disposable. We are human beings, just like anyone else. My city, my grandmother, like all Palestinians, just wants to live her life with freedom and human dignity we all deserve. Speaking up to save lives, Mr. Chair, no matter faith, no matter ethnicity, should not be controversial in this chamber. The cries of the Palestinian and Israeli children sound no different to me. Why? What I don't understand is why the cries of Palestinians sound different to you all. 71% of Michigan Democrats support a ceasefire. So you can try to censor me, but you can't silence their voices. I urge my colleagues to join with the majority of Americans and support a ceasefire now to save as many lives as possible. President Biden must listen to and represent all of us, not just some of us. I urge the President to have the courage to call for a ceasefire and the end of killings.
Now, here in Algiers, the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, has received the President of the Movement of the Society for Peace, MSP, Abdelali Hassani, at the latter's request. In a statement following his meeting with President Tebboune, Abdelali Hassani welcomed the position of the Algerian state under the leadership of the President of the Republic in support of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause. He underlined that this meeting, held at his request, had been an opportunity to discuss various issues of interest to our country and the Palestinian cause, welcoming at the same time the official Algerian position, the diplomatic dynamic, and the humanitarian and legal position in favor of the Palestinian people and their just cause. Now, the Prime Minister Ayman bin Abdurrahman has said that Algeria is deeply attached to advocating causes and interests of the African continent to establish the principles of living together in peace and the defense of the people's rights, notably the right to self-determination, insisting on the right of Palestinian people to fully exercise all their fundamental rights. Mariam Bershi tells us more.
In a speech on the occasion of the opening ceremony of the 71st Ordinary Session of the African Court of Human and People's Rights, Mr. bin Abdurrahman said that Algeria's hosting of this important African event in the field of human rights reflects the importance attached by the country to human rights and to the acts aiming to protect and promote them, as well as the interest showed to the African vision. Mr. bin Abdurrahman recalled the contribution of the African Court in defending the rights of defenseless people, stressing that history will always remember its bravery. The Prime Minister tackled the painful, unprecedented events that the world is going through and the obvious violations of human rights, international resolutions and treaties in Palestine, with the double standard policy that goes against human values and shared principles of humanity, international and regional human rights charters. He stressed that Algeria, which is following the serious development in occupied Palestine, insists on the rights of the Palestinian people to exercise their fundamental rights, notably their unquestionable rights to life, health, security, peace, as well as the right of Palestinian children to fully live their childhood in accordance with the international conventions and treaties.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs of the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has been received in Bucharest by the President of the Romanian Senate, Nicolae Ciucă, as part of his work and visit to Romania. The meeting was an opportunity to affirm the strong political will of both countries to revive their shared historical heritage and seize the opportunities available to strengthen relations of cooperation and partnership between Algeria and Romania. Both sides welcomed the role of parliamentary diplomacy in supporting the new dynamic in Algerian-Romanian relations in the context of the formation of parliamentary friendship groups on both sides. Meanwhile, Mr. Attaf has met representatives of the national community settled in Romania at the Algerian embassy in Bucharest at the end of his working visit to the country. The meeting, which was attended by Algeria's ambassador to Romania, Abdelmajid Namoun, was an opportunity to listen to the concerns of Algerian citizens in their country of residence and to inform them of the results of the minister's visit to Bucharest and the latest developments on the national scene. On this occasion, the minister underlined the special interest granted by the President of the Republic to the human dimension in the relations of cooperation and partnership between Algeria and the various friendly and partner countries, recalling the measures decided by the President of the Republic to address the concerns of the national community abroad and to defend its interests. Now, the Secretary General at the Foreign Affairs Ministry, Lounes Magraman, has received here in Algeria Singapore's Minister in the Prime Minister's Office, Second Minister for Education and Second Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mohamed Maliki Osman, now on a welcome visit to Algeria. Minister Maliki's visit reaffirms the warm and long-standing ties between Algeria and Singapore. Speaking to reporters about the historical relations relating the two countries, he said the following.
First of all, I want to say that the relations between Algeria and Singapore are warm. It's one of the long-standing relationship between Singapore and an Arab country. Dates back to our establishment of our relationship, diplomatic relations in 1983. So this year we commemorate the 40th anniversary of our relationship. And of course, our ties, although it was established in 1983, it predates to the 1960s when both our countries gained independence about the same time. We gained independence in 1965. It was slightly earlier than that.
The visiting minister commemorated the 40th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Singapore and Algeria. Speaking about bilateral relations, Mr. Maliki added.
So I hope that this visit, as I mentioned, will commemorate the 40th anniversary of our bilateral relations and reaffirm our good ties and strengthen the bilateral cooperation, particularly between two foreign countries, and also to explore new areas of collaboration, as you mentioned earlier, possibly in the field of vocational training, education, religious affairs, startups, and maritime domain. Many things that we can work together. As the 40 years evolve, there are many new emerging issues that we should address together and expand that collaboration. We look forward to signing of the bilateral MOU on the bilateral political consultations, which is currently in negotiation, as we mentioned earlier. We look forward to the conclusion of that MOU.
The Singaporean minister recalled his country's support for Algeria's non-permanent membership of the UN.
Of course, Singapore will not forget our old friends like Algeria, which had worked very closely with our non-aligned movement and on other issues of mutual concern at the United Nations and other fora. So we really appreciate a strong relationship that we've had and the support we've given to each other in those fora. We continue to find opportunities for us to strengthen that relationship. At the UN, we continue to work together, and I want to congratulate Algeria, who is going to be the non-permanent member.
The Minister of National Education, Abdel Hakim Belabed, has met in Paris on the sidelines of his participation in the 42nd session of the UNESCO General Conference. The Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Ryabkov, the minister underlined that bilateral cooperation in the field of education and teaching would allow consolidating scientific expertise and the exchange of experience, highlighting the interest granted by the state to the development of scientific and technological fields. Communication Minister Mohamed Lagab has presented the draft law on the written and electronic press to the members of the National People's Assembly. During a plenary session at the APN, Mohamed Lagab presented a summary of this bill detailing the law on information adopted by the two chambers of Parliament, stating that the bill implements the instructions of the President of the Republic and fulfills his commitments, particularly those relating to the sector. The main objective of the draft law on the written and electronic media is to provide the sector with a solid legal system, enabling journalists to carry out their work comfortably and giving citizens access to credible information in the service of the country. Now, in the Western Sahara File, the Sahrawi President and Secretary General of the Polisario Front, Brahim Ghali, has said that the crimes committed by the Moroccan occupation over the past 48 hours can only be described as systematic state terrorism, according to the Sahrawi Press Agency. The details were Said Bougazi.
At the closing session of the National Conference on Health, the Sahrawi president underlined that the 48 years of abominable colonial practices can only be described as systematic state terrorism in all its forms, which targeted thousands of innocent Sahrawi civilians murdered in the most atrocious manner, buried alive, thrown from helicopters, and shot or tortured to death, not to mention the poisoning of wells, the extermination of animals, and the massacre of citizens. 48 years ago, to the day, the occupying state organized what it calls the Green March, red with the blood of innocents and black in human history, as a pretext for its propaganda in order to justify its barbaric military invasion of the Sahrawi territory on 31st October 1975, in blatant violation of the decision of the International Court of Justice, international law, and humanitarian law, continued President Ghali. On the occasion of the National Conference on Health, President Ghali reiterated the commitment of the Sahrawi state to work for the development of the health system in the country, praising the efforts of its staff, underlining that the health system has always played a key role within the concerns, plans and programs of the Polisario Front and the Sahrawi state since the beginning of the struggle. President Ghali underlined that the health sector is constantly monitored for its improvement and continued development as an urgent priority alongside other sectors such as education and administration.
And now I invite you to listen to the first part of an interview with Algerian young author Hamza Qudri on his first novel, Sand Roses. The interview was conducted by Asa Bikar and produced by Mohammed Yousfi.
Our Talk, a weekly program with guests activating in different fields.
dear listeners, and welcome on the waves of Radio Algeria International. Today we have with us Algerian young author whose novel Sand Roses has won the Island Prize for African Writers. Hamza Koudri, welcome on Radio Algeria International.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
So could you tell us about your novel Sand Roses?
Sure. So Sand Roses is a historical novel. It's set in Bousada, an Algerian desert city, in the 1930s. And it mainly talks about the Wlad Nail dancers. So it's a story of these two sisters who come to Bousada with big dreams of becoming successful Wlad Nail dancers. And their idea of the city is a city of joy, but when they come, they discover quickly that this is also a city of horrors between what's going on with the colonial army, but also all of the troubles, you know, with the thieves and the crime. And so they quickly find themselves having to adapt to this new life. But then when they kill a French soldier in self-defense, and they try to hide the body, they find themselves in more and more trouble, especially with the French colonel, who, you know, Joseph, who is ruthless and he's trying to find the truth behind these killings. And so they find themselves in more and more trouble, and then they find themselves in the middle of a resistance against the colonial army.
Mm-hmm. So what makes a young author place a story in a 1930s setting, which is colonial Algeria?
Well, I think, for starters, I've always been a big fan of history and historical fiction in general. So I read a lot of history books and a lot of historical fiction, or historical novels. So I think the best thing, you know, for writers is to write what they enjoy reading. And I think there's a lot of material from the Algerian context, from our oral history, because it's rich. It's got a lot of stories to tell. And then actually learned about this culture by accident. I was listening to this podcast that mentioned it in passing, and so I did some research, and then I was fascinated by I was a little bit surprised that we had never heard about this. This isn't something we talk about it in general. But also I was fascinated by the whole culture and how it's different from, I think, the rest of the country. And, you know, now it has disappeared. And then there is so much to say about sort of the dynamics between the locals and the army and the French army, but also this almost like this unique culture of like this is a tribe that brings these women, that raises them to be dancers since their young age, and then they go and work for their dowries actually. And so also when I was looking a little bit more about their jewelry and how it is, you know, it became sort of like a sign of their wealth and success. You know, the more sort of like coin necklaces they have or jewelry they have, the more successful they are. But it also makes them as a moving target, easy moving target. So anybody can come and sort of like hurt them or kill them and steal their jewelry. So in the novel, you see the sisters, you know, when they have to defend themselves, they will, and that's also like based on true events. They used to have these bracelets with spikes. And that's a way for them sort of to defend themselves if anybody attacks them at night. So all of this, I think, you know, made for really rich context and sort of like a good setting for a novel. So before I knew it, I was developing an outline for this novel.
Okay, great. So as you just said, the beautiful city of Bousada is strongly present in the novel, as it is the main setting of the novel, right?
Yes, it is the main setting of the novel, and I like to think that sort of it's almost, you know, a character in the novel, and I also love reading those books where the city is sort of, you know, it's part of it is a character, and so Bousada, you will see that sort of like it brings a lot of, you know, it's a city of joy, but it's also a city of horror, and then with all the inhabitants, you see sort of how like, you know, between the weather and the mood, and you have these sandstorms, and sort of everything really sort of like plays together to create either sort of like a joyful event, but also like a sinister event at the same time. So I had a lot of fun sort of also involving Bousada. And, you know, like I think there's a lot of landmarks too that I wanted to highlight. Sort of like, you know, there is the Moulin Ferrero, which was sort of very popular. Bousada was a very popular destination for tourists from Algiers, from all over the country, from all over the world. Actually, you know, we have records of, for example, National Geographic sending journalists, or a lot of, you know, tourists from Europe coming to, you know, for a weekend getaway. And so I wanted to sort of bring that out a little bit and sort of explore that kind of dynamic lifestyle going on there.
Yeah, many other colonial figures also fell in love with Bousada, like Nasr ad-Din Dine.
Yeah, and so I try to sort of recreate. I mean, we talk a lot about Itandini is always mentioned in the novel because this novel sort of like starts just a few years after his death in real life, and so there's people, you know, he's still fresh in people's memory. And at that time, there's actually sort of like a His tomb has been turned into sort of like not a museum yet, but sort of like a mausoleum at that point. And so people would go sort of like we say, for example, for baraka or for blessings, and so like this was already a tradition back then. So it was almost like a saint, because towards the end of his life, he had converted to Islam, and he actually also wrote a novel about a red nail dancer in French. And so so he was a painter who was trying to document the red nail culture through paintings. But that's also what I found through my research, is a lot of the history is found through visual documentation, I always say. So either pictures or videos or paintings, or even, for example, now statues in Hama. There's statues of like red nail dancers if you pay attention, if you're walking around. And there isn't much written documentation. I mean, there's a little bit, but not really enough. And so I think that was sort of the realization that I came to. But it did help me to find all of these sort of recreations of these scenes from Busada through videos or images or paintings.
Yeah, they helped you with the inspiration.
Definitely, yeah. So like you get the sort of the jewelry and the dressing, but also sort of like you have these scenes of like a campsite, or for example, tourists at a cafe, or for some of the videos, we even have like some of the women dancing with the music. So I think it really helps. It helps you recreate the reality back then. And yeah, like you said, there is a lot of I think Algerians or foreigners who really fell in love. Like I said, there was a journalist from National Geographic, I can't remember the name, but there was also like other French painters and German painters who would go spend years, sometimes just start to assimilate within the local culture, trying to paint a lot of the scenery around them. Yeah.
Great. I don't want to spoil the story for our listeners, but I would like to ask you, who are the Sand Roses in your story?
So it's I think the title, it's very difficult for me to commit to the title, because I didn't want people to say, well, this is a romance about sand roses. But for me, the more I worked on it, the more I thought this was the right title for it, because in the book we actually talk about it. So there's a couple of references to how basically the red nail dancers in general are sand roses, and why. Because they're beautiful as the rose. The rose in sand rose is beautiful, but it's also tough. It's not like a fragile rose. And so that's what we think of these red nail dancers, because they have to suffer so much, with the injustices, with the violence, and so it makes them really tough. But they're still very pretty. They're raised to be these beautiful entertainers, but still they're tough. So that's why we think of them as sand roses. And of course, I think it refers to the two main characters, Salima and Fahima, who are the sisters who come to town.
So we did it on purpose, because desert roses or sand roses symbolize resilience and strength, but at the same time they are so beautiful.
Exactly, and they're sort of like the creation of nature. So we find them all like that in nature, and it's almost like this raw beauty that you find out there. And again, I think so that's the difference between a fragile little rose, that you could keep for a day or 2 days, maybe it will wither. It's very easy for it sort of to just fall apart. But these sand roses are really tough. So yeah, I thought it was really good. I had a lot of fun sort of working with that imagery around it.
Okay, great. So do you aim with your novel to denounce this tradition, or to actually praise it?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think also through my research I found that there is a lot of sort of denial of the existence of this culture in the first place, or even sort of like you said, some people trying to justify it or denounce it. And if you talk to people from Busada, they still have that in their memory. It's still fresh. People, because some of these people continue to work until the 70s and 80s. So a lot of, I think the older generations would remember a time when the red nail dancers used to work in Busada. And there's also like a couple of historians that I've read from Algeria who wrote about them, which was also very helpful. So in Sand Roses, I try very consciously to neither denounce nor celebrate, but mostly sort of to recognize that this is a culture that exists. And so, from the point of view of Fahima and Salima, what we try to do is, recognize that these are just women who are trying to make their way, to navigate a road for themselves. They're trying to work, and they have their own. they have their own dreams and aspirations. One of them wants to collect a dowry and go back and get married and start a family, because that was also a very common fate for these dancers. Or one of them is a bit more dreamy, so she wants to, to get a painting of herself. She wants to travel the world, because also this was common. We hear of Hizia, but we hear a lot of dancers since the 1800s who would travel to, fairs in Paris or circus in Italy. There was also a time where they went all the way to Chicago in 1893 to perform at the